Welcome everyone. This is episode 24 of the Transmaxxing podcast, and today's topic is boymoding versus girlmoding. So I'm going to start by asking Andrea Tate about her experience with that.
Okay, so I only just stopped boymoding in September, and I have to say, despite my fears, life has been, I would say, much better. Obviously, it's something that I'm still working on, but I've noticed a lot of the time when you're in the closet or you're pretending you want to transition, you're holding on for too long, there's a lot of hostility, and a lot of the time it originates from people not knowing how to work you out, whether you're a guy, a girl, or anything. I think the worst thing really is when you have the mental kind of emotional ranges of your transition self, but you are presenting as a guy, and you're going to get the worst of both worlds. You're going to have people calling you sir and being harsh to you and weird to you and expecting, even if they're trying to be nice or friendly, they'll ask you stuff like, oh, what's your favorite football team at parties and stuff? And it's like, you don't even have any interest in that. And as we discussed in the previous episode, a lot of male socialization is a massive cope, and there's very little scope for individuality or doing anything interesting. And unfortunately, if you don't fit the rigid guidelines of being a guy, you're honestly just setting yourself up for a bit of suffering, really. And I think that after you've been on HRT for a while, it's completely unnecessary. And this is coming from someone that actually wore the Boy Murder hoodie unironically as well. So that's my initial input.
Yeah, I think a big thing when it comes to boymoding and stuff is there's this intention that you want to present as female. And so there's going to be more pain coming to you whenever you are getting gendered as a male. Meanwhile, it also makes it harder for you to practice and bring yourself out there because you're just always on guard, always scared that someone's going to catch on to you. Even that's kind of the point of transitioning, is to have people know that you do want to be a woman, pretty much.
Yeah, why would you want to pass for something you don't want to be anyway? It makes zero sense.
I mean, there is mainly one reason for boymoding, and this is that many areas are transphobic. So early on in your transition, it might be difficult to present fully feminine, but over time this will be easier because you get more changes.
I want to add to this. So, in the stages when I was still talking to my family and I had a social life built around my previous persona, I threw all my energy into watching my favorite trans YouTubers and their journey, reading about women's fashion, reading about the differences between the sexes, and, like, for instance, clothing. There's a reason why women typically wear more jewelry than men, and it's historical too. And I feel like having the core principles of the differences between the two really helped me, so that when I started transitioning, I didn't dive into becoming a frilly twink, like a sissy hon or something, like wearing pink, I don't know, pink thigh-high socks and dressing like literally no a woman dresses like. And I feel like with all that time, even if you can't physically transition, there is so much research and things you can do in the meantime. So if you can't come out right now, do not get disheartened. There's a lot of things that you can do, and it will definitely help you when you're in a position to physically transition. It will make things so much easier and smoother.
Yeah, we have to be clear about that. Not everyone can transition right away. Some people have to wait, unfortunately. But generally, you want to transition fairly early to really get the practice in the real world, learn female socialization practically.
Yeah, your personal safety is the utmost importance, but it is still important to try to find ways of getting safe spaces where you can practice these things and have zero worry of repercussions happening and losing your home before you're even 18, you know?
Yeah, if you live with transphobic parents, and obviously you have to be careful, and it might not be safe to come out to them. And I have experience in dealing with people like that. They are often very ignorant. It's a waste of time trying to reason with them. So in that circumstance, it might be better to wait until you're 18, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's like, especially if you think they're transphobic, it's better to have, like, an escape plan if it all does, like, kind of go the wrong way. So then you're pretty much ready to move out in the first place. And, you tell them this just to, like, gauge their response. And then, if it does go bad, you have all that money and then you can just basically move out. No worries about any sort of homelessness and whatnot.
If you're going to uni, now is the best time. If you do go to university and you want to start transition, a lot of universities are quite supportive to trans people these days because they're forward-thinking places, and it's not just in the UK, but it's in most Western countries. Also, the fact that you're living in your own dorm, sure, you might have to boy mode during Christmas, or if they find out, you might not go back to Christmas, but there'll be plenty of stuff you can do. There'll be people in similar positions. There'll even be international students that can't go back to their families during that time. It's a lot easier to do that while you're in the education system than when you're outside it. Now, given that you are at uni, it'll also motivate you to work harder towards your goals because you know that you can't just go back to your parents afterwards. My example, for instance, they found out when I was in the last year of uni, and ever since, it's been an uphill struggle for me to get support and to actually get somewhere to live. I mean, I found somewhere to live, but it was not easy, and I was very lucky. And I think that if you're in uni and you've already got a job sorted out afterwards, it's going to be so much smoother, and you will not have to rely on your parents. So just work hard on your grades. And if you're not in uni, then whatever you're doing after college, like if you're in an apprenticeship or something, pretty much do the same. Just focus on being independent. I think everyone should focus on being independent anyway, even though it's very difficult and hostile for people in our generation to actually go out there and, establish themselves. Still, there's definitely things that you can do.
Yeah, one thing to look into, for example, is just getting welfare, and this should maybe be a last resort. But if you, for example, have some disability, you cannot work, you have to look into that, because otherwise you will have to live off your parents, and they will have leverage over you.
Yeah. Another big thing to note is it is probably better to try to transition while in schooling before work, because a lot of times, the early transition could make you have more conflicts, more rough friction with your workplace, and it could make it harder for you to truly transition or have a place of employment still, because they may fire you for different reasons and whatnot, and sometimes they're able to get away with that depending on where you live.
Yeah, it's often better to start transitioning at least with HRT early on, because then you have a better chance of passing eventually. While if you wait until it's safe to socially transition, then you might not be able to pass even with surgery, unfortunately.
Yeah, earlier the better for HRT. On the flip side, I'd say, I've been saying, you shouldn't try to do it for work. But on the flip side, try to make sure you realize how less scary it is to come out, especially when you're outside of the transphobic parents kind of living environment. A lot of people, they get very scared of how it will be to go out as a woman and present as a woman. I think Andrea Tate even has examples of this where it was just this overwhelming amount of aversion to it, where it's things are gonna go bad and
Yeah. So I rot my brain looking at Reddit and a lot of the really bad kind of news for trans people. And the thing is, when you go out there, obviously have your guard up. But the difference is that when you're online, you are taking everyone's bad experience in one go. And that is absolutely not what happens in reality. Even if you live in an area that isn't exactly pro-trans support, you'll kind of know when you meet people that have bad vibes. What I wanted to say, basically, was that the thought of doing it was the most daunting for me. I didn't want to be, a faghorn or someone that was just, not fully, passing but trying to present. The problem is that if you repress for too long, and especially if you hang around LGBT spaces and you don't try to integrate with the general population, you're going to be mistaken for a very effeminate gay guy, because there's enough feminine cues, but there are still some male cues, and when you're in the context of your area, people will interpret you that way. Whereas if you try to focus on the general population and try to blend in with everyone around you, it won't be as scary, it won't be as daunting, and you will find that even though it's not easy at all, it's not impossible, and it's definitely not as scary as a lot of the scaremongering news feeds out there are trying to do at the moment.
Yeah, and also do not forget that normies are often clueless. They are not like me. I have a better ability to spot trannies and same for other people here because I have seen a lot of them. And I might even think that some cis females are trans. But if you're like a normie, you don't really think about it too much. You just assume someone is female.
Most people just have their own frame of reference, and if you give enough feminine cues away without giving any dramatically male ones, even if people clock you, they're not going to be too bothered. At the end of the day, if you want to fit in, it's about not being a fucking weirdo. Not wearing weird-ass tights and a frilly skirt like you're some kind of set from an anime film. No one dresses like that in real life, as I said before, and you're just going to get pointed out. You don't want to give people ammunition to tear you down with. And what I'm basically trying to say is, if you're smart about this and you're smart about blending in, and especially in your context and you're in the people around you and like the place that you live, then a lot of the time you won't be given as much hassle as you think you're going to get.
Yeah, gauge your fashion sense for sure. It's important to know what's like out there where it's like you look like a child chose what to wear for today versus,
Please don't, like, whatever you do, please do not wear those thigh-high socks with a frilly skirt and then some freaking trekking shoes. They always wear trekking shoes. I don't know why.
Yeah.
The ugliest freaking shoes. Like, please, at least, like, dress like a freaking boy. Like, dress androgynous and wear some heels. You will look a lot more like a woman than dressing in some freaking, like, I don't know what the hell some of these people are trying to do.
I have some bias with like running shoes or like normal kinds of shoes with skirts. I think you should always be wearing like some sort of flats or like something cuter than just like running shoes. But there's sometimes you can get away with that. But yeah, a lot of times you can look very sexy and like wear some of these obscure and like overly feminine things, but you have to do it the right way and like accessorize properly,
I would say a lot of people think I need to look very feminine at the beginning of my transition to look like a woman. And I say the opposite. In my opinion, what really helped for me as well is obviously you're going to get clocked as a fag in some spaces, but that will wear off as HRT gives you changes. I would say that dress androgynously and work to the feminine clothing. The more androgynous you are at the beginning of transition, the less friction you're going to cause because you need to learn a lot of things. There's a lot of things you need to learn subconsciously and subtly. There's a lot of different fashion kind of accessories you need to try out and just start from there. And then when you want to really wear like the girly stuff, I think, after a fair amount of time just dressing more on the androgynous side of femininity, then go for it. And obviously you don't have to follow this as a general rule. This is just like my recommendations based on people that I've noticed have successfully integrated and passed and are actually doing quite well versus some people that unfortunately don't even know what their problem is, but it's quite obvious.
So what about the non-binary option where you don't really try to pass as male or female but something in between? Is this ever a good idea?
Well, the thing is, if you're going to be talking about integrating a society full of cis people, non-binary pretty much doesn't exist, especially if you're male. You're just going to be clocked as male. You're going to be clocked as a feminine guy or a homosexual or someone. I mean, non-binary is a concept and it's real, but in the eyes of the majority, the average cis person, you're either a man or a woman, or you're like, a lesbian or a really gay man. So you've got to pick something and approximate yourself to it and then wean yourself off that. You've got to think of it as like a game, really. You're moving on a chessboard, but you can't make the wrong moves because if you do that, you're going to get... I mean, you might be just listening to this now thinking, oh my God, this is so off-putting. But bear with me. You need to think about the moves that you're taking and make sure that they're consistent and they're going towards the right direction gently and not making any drastic changes.
Yeah, and the issue here is that sure, you might yourself prefer some non-binary representation. There are a lot of people who might prefer a body like that. But when you interact with real people in the real world, you have to choose like either a male presentation or a female presentation for the most part, unfortunately. And then
I'm
maybe
kind of
when
biased
you're
because in the
home,
UK, non-binary doesn't exist legally, so I guess like that's just my opinion from the culture that I'm from. But yeah, I agree completely.
It's just an uphill battle in general. Like, most people aren't going to even understand it when you try to explain it to them. And like, it's exactly that, where they're going to see you as a guy, as a girl, a girly guy, manly girl, something in between. That they're not going to see non-binary. That's like, I understand what non-binary means, and I cannot pinpoint what that would look like because, humans are sexually dimorphic. There's not like an in between that is neither. You can be androgynous and be both, but being neither is like doesn't really work out.
And this is absolutely not a dig at anyone that's non-binary who identifies as that. At the end of the day, if that's who you are, it's who you are, and it's amazing. But we are talking about transmaxing, and we're talking about trying to blend in the population as a male transitioning to female. So if you're listening to this podcast, just try to keep the overall goal in mind and everything we're saying within that context.
Yeah, it's just in general, a lot of times when it comes to self-identification with like little to nothing else going with it, you're just fighting an uphill battle. You know, if
Amount of
you like
non-binary people
present
or non-binary males that I've seen being called sir countlessly or dude, bro, buddy, and watching them die inside is I could not count on my fingers. I wouldn't have any left.
yeah.
I think it's common that many people who cannot pass might go for the non-binary coupe because they cannot really pass as a female, but I think this is a bad option in that case. You're better off on modding, to be honest.
If non-binary makes you feel at peace with yourself, go for it, but I wouldn't expect the same results as transitioning from male to female. It wouldn't be a fair test.
Yeah. It seems like non-binary gives you the same problems as being trans with none of the benefits that may come with being a
Exactly.
woman.
Your life is hard enough, you don't need to make it harder.
I think as a compromise for people who want to have a more non-binary representation can be that maybe when you're home you might alter your presentation a bit to maybe look more androgynous, maybe something in between, because then you are only with like people close to you, with people who accept you for who you are. But when you are shopping, just make it easy for you, or like at school or at work, it's very easy to just have a binary representation. Just makes it easy for everyone.
Andrea Tate, have you ever went over like the legal name change process in your area?
I am pending that. I know people have done it, and I am going to be doing it too. Basically, in the UK, all you need is a deed poll. It's a legal document you print out, and you need two witnesses present. They sign it, and then you can use that as proof to go into your bank or go anywhere pretty much and change your name, and that will generally change your title as well. Fun fact, if you're in the UK, the title Mr., Miss, Mrs., or anything like that, it's fictitious. It's not part of your legal name, so you can just change that on the whim whether you want to or not. A lot of the times, actually, this is an interesting point. A lot of the times, that's the secret, that's the hidden gender marker. So, like, if you're going to have say, for instance, you're signing up for a new service or somewhere and you have Mr., of course, people are going to see you as a guy. That's pretty much the equivalent of ticking an M on a box if there was a form. And a lot of the places it's quite unnecessary, but it's still part of the system. Obviously, for some places, you need to change your name in order to change your title because the deed poll proves that. But yeah, also in the UK, it's recommended that if you want to get your gender legally changed, it's recommended that you get a deed poll done ASAP so that you can use that as evidence of your social transition before the 2-year waiting period, which I'm going to be doing very soon as well. So, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so you
here
do
in
need
Canada,
to commit to a social transition before you can legally change your sex, right?
So, in the UK, there's no like centralized system. You need to live for 2 years, have medical documents, have social evidence, and that usually comes from the deed poll. and then you need to use this proof. You submit it to a panel, and they'll decide whether you can change your gender or not. As far as I know, you don't need a GRC to get bottom surgery anymore, but this process is very similar. You need to be, show that you're very serious about it and that you're consistent, and show that you have a fairly decent mental health. Obviously, everyone's different. This is not easy for someone, and they know that, but for instance, you're making these decisions in good faith towards and you know that it will help you. And I think if you're transmaxing, you won't have a problem, because the whole idea really is just making your life better. So
Yeah, it's actually a lot different in Canada. I feel like it was more optional. I don't think I'd have to look more into it if I wanted to get the gender marker changed on my birth certificate. That one will say male unless I figure that out. But
when I was
the rest of them, they legally allowed me to change my sex. And then basically, they allowed me to do this when I got my legal name changed. With the legal name change, though, I had to get my electronic fingerprints done. There was a few other documents I had to sign to prove. Had to give them all my old IDs, so then they print me off a new one. It was actually pretty expensive for the whole thing in general. It was
yeah, in the UK you do that
$800.
with a passport. And then obviously there's 3 forms of ID in the UK. There's a pass card you can get, which is actually amazing because there's no gender marker on that, and you can have whatever name you want on it. There's the driver's license, and there's the passport, and pretty much the same thing really. You can just you have to submit evidence and then send it to them, and then they'll send it back. But an interesting thing is that gender is localized a lot of the time. For instance, I changed my gender marker on the NHS recently, but legally they would go by your birth certificate, but there's no centralized ID. That's what I'm trying to say. For instance, the police have a different ID to the hospital. They changed my gender marker too for stuff regarding a certain incident that happened to me. But it's the same with everything else. You just update them along the way. The problem is that it's a lot of hassle updating everything all the time. But it's the same as if you move address. That's what my doctor told me. You're going to have to update a lot of those things too. So just see it like that.
Yes, there's quite a bit to update, but once it's all done, it's done. You won't have to do it again.
Exactly.
Some people have issues about their birth certificate saying the one thing, but I think it at least kind of makes sense. I was assigned male at birth.
Yeah, I think one thing to consider is that in some circumstances it's advantageous to have the female identity legally. For example, in war situations, or sometimes if there are gender quotas, it's often better to be female than male.
Yeah, and if you have troubles getting this kind of legal status in your area, it might be the best for you to move. Because a lot of these third world countries, it appears they have access to HRT, but they don't have access to legally changing this stuff. So you can be doing as how we said it here, you're taking the hormones, you're boymoding, you're practicing, and then you move, and then your whole life changes, and then you can get these legal things done when you're in your new living accommodation.
Yeah, this is something that I think is appealing for some people, is the ability to just leave and basically start a new life somewhere else. And I realize that this can be hard, but for young people it can be a good idea to just move away, start fresh. Don't bother to keep in touch with old friends and stuff if you don't have much of that, if you don't feel like you have any real friends. You don't like your parents, you don't like anyone, then just leave everything behind and start new. Might be a good idea, to be honest.
Yeah, it's good to try to figure out how to get rid of the attachments if you know it's bad for you. I know a lot of people struggle with this, where they want to have their parents love them and stuff, and they just refuse to. And instead of continuing to hurt yourself trying to fix it, it might be better just to move on in general.
Yeah, and to be clear here, I am not necessarily suggesting that you just cut ties with your parents, but if they are not going to like respect you even basically, like if they're just rude to you and bad to you, nothing good come from, then you don't have any obligation towards them. And in some cases you can like just keep in touch via text sometimes. And wait for them to realize their mistakes. Which might never happen then.
Oh yeah, to clarify though, my driver's license does say that I am female. All my other identification does say I'm female. It's only my birth certificate that I don't think I'm allowed to change.
Isn't there some areas where you get cheaper car insurance if you change your gender to female legally?
In the
Yeah,
UK,
I heard of that.
apparently, that's
have
not a
to
thing in the
look
UK anymore.
Yeah,
Oh, no.
a lot of places don't have that anymore, I know.
Yeah, unfortunately, the self-identifiers have been ruining it for the rest of us trans women.
Okay, this marks the end of episode 24 of the Transmaxxing podcast. Make sure to comment below and maybe like this video. Have a nice day everyone.